Welcome to the Get Fit Guys, quick and dirty tips to slim down and shape up. My name is Ben Greenfield. I'm the Get Fit Guy, and today's episode, you're going to learn about whether this special kind of fat loss surgery called CoolScuplting fat loss surgery really works. Now, it was probably about 2 years ago that I began to see tons of posters, ads, and pop-ups popping up about a fancy new fat loss surgery process called CoolScuplting. CoolScuplting. At first, I thought it was some kind of an exciting new ice sculpting competition. Haha. But it turns out that it's more like carving off parts of your love handles with an icy cold surgical tool. And in today's episode, you're going to discover exactly whether this fancy fat loss surgery actually works. Okay, so let's start here. What is it? Well, CoolScuplting is an alternative to liposuction in which a physician uses a non-invasive tissue cooling applicator. The way it works is that the applicator is a vacuum that the medical professional puts over the area of tissue in which you want to lower body fat, like, say, your butt. So in this case, the applicator would hold the butt between two cooling panels, take all of the heat out of that area, and theoretically cause something called fat cell apoptosis, also known as fat cell death, fat cell reduction, and loss of subcutaneous fat. But the way that the vacuum suction is set up is such that it doesn't actually cause damage to the skin, which means you get loss of subcutaneous fat without skin burns or frostbite. The idea is that you go in for a few sessions of fat layer reduction using this CoolScuplting treatment, and it would be something you would use instead of a comparatively outdated surgical method, like liposuction. So I looked up studies on this, and there's actually a few small studies primarily done on animals. So the technical term for this procedure is cryosurgery, which is surgery performed at very low temperatures, and it's a protocol usually used for tissue destruction. In this case, fat tissue destruction. For example, one study that was done back in 2008, and I'll link that over at quickanddirtytips.com. Just look for this episode number 316 at quickanddirtytips.com. Now, this study found that when researchers did about 10-minute-long treatments of a fat-based cold exposure to black Yucatan pigs, of all things, the lipid area underneath the skin was significantly lower, and there was a loss of adipose tissue without actual injury to the skin and without scarring. So the results of that study indicate that you can actually get a localized loss of subcutaneous fat through this type of cooling. Now, what's perhaps even more interesting, and something I talked about with Dr. Kate Shanahan over at bengreenfieldfitness.com, is that in most cases, fat cells are usually going to become other cells, such as nerve and muscle cells, or they're going to shrink, which means you're either going to get fat cell conversion or fat cell shrinkage, but those cells still possess a capability to refill with energy from food that you eat and still be able to enlarge once or if you begin overeating. So, for example, muscle cells and bone cells and nerve cells that were converted from fat cells can get converted back into fat cells. And because of this, actual true fat cell death is something that can be pretty difficult to achieve. Now, as I discussed in that podcast episode with Dr. Shanahan over on my website, you can pull this off with exercise and healthy eating and very low levels of inflammation, but fat cell apoptosis is not the easiest thing to achieve. So why am I telling you all this? Well, the thing that's interesting about cryolipolysis, or CoolScuplting surgery, is that it does actually cause controlled cell death of the fat tissue itself. So it's as if you get rid of fat tissue and you don't actually risk it coming back. Of course, this is assuming that after you've done the surgical procedure, you actually do pay attention to your diet and your exercise program, and you don't necessarily use the CoolSculpt surgery as an excuse to eat Twinkies and sit around watching reality TV shows all day long. Now, of course, the downside of any surgery like this is how expensive it might be for you, whether it could be covered by insurance, and ultimately, whether it's something that's going to be superior to just, say, doing something like cold showers or cold thermogenesis or the use of body cooling gear like a fat-burning vest or a cool gut-burning device. Now, you can consider simply going out in the morning in your backyard if you live in a cool area and doing some yoga on your back porch while it's still a little bit cold. Another cooling technique would be shiver walks, in which you go out for a walk in the brisk air in a t-shirt and shorts while it's cold outside. All of these things can cause lipolysis, upregulation of the fat-burning enzyme lipase, and a host of other I couldn't help myself, effects that this freezing cousin of liposuction doesn't necessarily cause. For example, CoolScuplting can't cause upregulation of adiponectin, which is a fat-burning hormone that can reduce systemic inflammation, can increase burning of fatty acids as a fuel, can increase metabolism, can have some effects on risk of diabetes by elevating the burning of glucose, and insulin sensitivity can cause a decrease in inflammatory cytokines, an increase in pain tolerance, and an improvement in nervous system stability and the tone of the the vagus nerve. So, in other words, there's all sorts of effects that you can get from simply incorporating temperature fluctuations, especially cold, in your day-to-day routine. Effects that you're not going to necessarily get from something like CoolScuplting. Now, ultimately, although proven to be efficacious for temporary spot reduction, CoolScuplting surgery seems like a quick fix that doesn't offer quite as many benefits as frequent cold showers, being okay with shivering every now and again, and engaging in other forms of cold thermogenesis. Now, if you have questions, comments, or feedback about whether this CoolScuplting fat loss surgery really works, then just join the conversation over at facebook.com/getfitguy. That's facebook.com/getfitguy. And until next time, I'm Ben Greenfield, the Get Fit Guy, asking you, what are you waiting for? Go get fit.